Here is our lesson for Unit 7. This is about Earth's various different types of energy resources. There are two broad categories of energy resources found on Earth. The first is non-renewable resources. These are resources that take millions of years to form. It takes so long for these to form that it's not really feasible for new non-renewable resources to be made on a human timescale. Examples of these things are fossil fuels. So for example, like this is the oil refinery that's over in Great Falls. And then things like minerals, so metals that we can mine out of the earth. Okay, first let's talk about the different types of fossil fuels. First is coal. Coal forms over millions of years when there's heat and pressure on swamps, like those coal swamp forests that were from the Carboniferous era that we learned about when we talked about the geologic timescale. The different grades of coal in order of increasing energy per volume is peat, and then lignite, bituminous, and anthracite coal. Anthracite coal has the most energy. It's the most valuable form of coal. The way that we get energy from coal is that we burn it to make steam that will turn a turbine, and by turning that turbine we get electricity production. Some pros of coal are that it's cheap and easy to mine, and some cons are that it leaves terrible pollution. It can cause acid rain when some of the pollution goes up into the atmosphere and mixes with water in the clouds and acidifies that water. And then also there's big scars on the land where coal mines exist. So here is an example of a coal mine in Montana. This is a picture, I believe it's from the 80s, and this is of the mine up in Coal Strip. Next type of fossil fuel is petroleum or oil products. So again, heat and pressure on remains of plants and microscopic animals, mostly things like plankton from ancient seafloors, causes petroleum products to form. Some pros of petroleum products are that there is a lot of energy contained within this liquid form. There's many things you can do with it once it's refined, so it's not just for fuel. You can make like plastic products and things like that, which are really important. And some cons of fossil fuels are, of course, the pollution. There's a lot of carbon dioxide that comes from the burning of these fossil fuels. Plastic pollution, like in the ocean, is a problem. The major deposits of petroleum are starting to run out on Earth because we've burned through them so much. Also, there's a lot of political garbage involved with like countries that want to control the different oil deposits around the world. So pretty much oil can be made into a bunch of different things like gasoline, jet fuel, plastic products. An example of where this happens, here's a picture from up in northeastern Montana. There's a big oil field called the Bakken oil field, B-A-K-K-E-N. That's the biggest example of where petroleum products are found in Montana. Next fossil fuel is natural gas. It's a similar process of formation as the petroleum products that we just talked about a second ago, except some of it is left in a gaseous state rather than liquid. Some pros of natural gas are that it's a pretty good source of energy. It burns a little bit cleaner than like a gasoline product would. But the cons are that still, even if it's burning a little bit cleaner, there's still a lot of pollution, carbon dioxide pollution. A lot of fresh water is required for the extraction of natural gas, and that's typically done through this process of fracking or hydraulic fracturing, where they just force water and some other stuff down into layers of rock that have the natural gas contained with it, and then that pressure just forces the gas to come out up through this well, and then it gets trapped here and sent away for use. Fracking, there's pollution associated with that, water pollution, air pollution, and also fracking can cause earthquakes because you're forcing this water down into this non-aquifer rock, and so it's not porous, and so it can cause little tremors around here. Here's an example of earthquakes in the central United States here, where there's no like major active fault lines. You can see here in the early 2010s, when fracking started to get really common there, the incidence of earthquakes spiked hugely. An example of where natural gas deposits are in Montana is down in the southwest by Dillon. So the next type of fossil fuel is the tar sands. This is a sticky form of hydrocarbon called tar that's mixed in with sand and clay. It forms from old deposits of like oil that were digested by certain types of bacteria. They digested the lighter stuff and left behind the sticky tar. Some pros of tar sands are that there are tons of this all throughout the world, especially in the United States. There's a lot of potential for mining this kind of stuff. The cons of it are the way outweigh the pros because the pollution that comes from burning this stuff is terrible. It doesn't burn cleanly at all. It's really expensive to mine and refine because it is mixed with all the sand and clay. You have to get all of that out, which is hard to do because it's so sticky. There's a lot of toxic waste associated with the refinement process. The mines are disgusting, hideous scars on the environment, and there's a lot of fresh water that's required for the extraction and washing of the tar to get the sand and clay out. The final type of fossil fuel is oil shales, and oil shales, you've got shale sedimentary rock layers that have oil trapped inside of them. Here's a picture example of this, a piece of shale, and you can see this black stuff is kind of a greasy substance called keratin, and that is the stuff we are trying to get out of the rock. Pros of this are that there are tons of it, especially in the United States. There are huge deposits of this oil shale. Some cons, there's barely any energy that you can get out of this stuff once it is extracted from the rock. There's a ton of pollution, especially carbon dioxide when you burn it. Hideous mines and refinement areas, and there's a lot of fresh water required for the extraction of this. So again, there are in Montana, the example of where you can find some oil shales is in that Bakken oil field up here in the northeast. Our next non-renewable resource is nuclear energy. So nuclear energy is produced when you've got radioactive materials such as uranium. When they decay, they release heat, and that heat is used to heat up water to make steam to turn that turbine to get electricity. So some pros of nuclear energy, there's so much energy associated with this radioactive decay, as much energy as we could ever need on Earth as humans. There's very little or no carbon dioxide pollution. So like when you see these nuclear plants right here, and there's these big cooling towers, this is not pollution like carbon dioxide and horrible things coming out of here. This is all just water vapor coming out of here from the steam that they're using to make the electricity. So nuclear energy is different than the other non-renewable energy resource options because it's considered green because there is very little pollution associated with it. The carbon footprint of nuclear is tiny compared to something like coal. So some cons of nuclear energy production are that the facilities are expensive to build. You have to, once that stuff is decayed, you can't use it anymore for the nuclear energy process, so you have to store the waste. Typically that's done in these barrels, and then they just dig big holes and bury them out in the desert somewhere, but you do have to store that hazardous waste. And then nuclear meltdown disasters are possible where reactors blow up and they can release radioactive material out into the world. So here is when the Fukushima disaster happened, when there was that tsunami in 2011. It let radioactive matter all throughout the Pacific Ocean, and then this is a picture of the Chernobyl reactor that exploded back in the 80s and basically left the area around it uninhabitable because of the nuclear fallout. We currently in Montana do not have any nuclear energy power plants. So these aren't resources that are used for energy, but I wanted to throw them in here anyway. Metallic minerals, also called ores. Examples of these: gold, silver, copper, mercury, palladium, platinum, nickel, just any kind of metal that we want to dig out of the ground to use for stuff. Pros of this, it's used for many, many different things, especially electronics that we use in the modern age. Cons can be that the mines are just absolutely devastating to the landscape and the environment. The examples are the pit in Butte. Here is the pit. It's a giant open pit mine where the groundwater flowed in, and it's all acidic and horrible, and any goose that lands in here dies. And then also the Smith River mine is a proposed mine over kind of near White Sulphur Springs area where they want to build a new copper mine. And so there is risk to that ecosystem there associated with the mine. Non-metallic minerals, things like building materials, rocks, stone that we use, limestone, quartzite, granite, marble. Industrial materials like talc and sulfur that are used to make other things. Some pros of these non-metallic minerals are that pretty much everything that we use is made with these, like all the houses that we live in and the roads we drive on, stuff like that. Cons of this are that quarrying and mining can be really damaging to the landscape. You can see here, this is a sandstone quarry. This is, I think, another sandstone quarry. These are both in Montana, and it's just leaves a big open scar on the landscape. An example of where quarrying takes place in Montana is the Ash Grove Quarry over by Montana City, where they're quarrying limestone to make cement. So now on to renewable resources. These are things that can be replenished or generated on a human timescale, so they're a little bit more feasible for us to be using for our energy burning needs. So just quick little thing, in Helena back in February, they announced that by 2030 we're going to be using only clean renewable energy for our power in the Helena area. First type of renewable resource is solar energy. This is when you've got sunlight collected by what's called photovoltaic cells, and which are like the solar panels that you see on roofs, and then that energy is converted into a form of electricity that we can use in our houses. And it is stored in batteries for later use. Pros of this are that it's very abundant. There's a ton of radiation coming from the sun all the time. It's free. Nobody owns the sunlight. You don't have to pay anybody for the sunlight. And there's no carbon dioxide pollution associated with this at all. So some cons are that the equipment, like the solar panels and the converter equipment, is pretty expensive. Like, it's an expensive initial expense. And then you can't make new electricity during cloudy days or at night, so you have to have an effective battery storage system. Some examples of this in Montana: here's a little solar farm off of the interstate when you're driving towards Billings from Bozeman. And then here's a nice one in Helena. There's a bunch of solar panels installed on the roof of Carroll College. Next type of renewable resource is wind energy. Pretty much you've got wind that is turning a turbine, these big windmill things, turning a turbine that generates electricity. Some pros are that the wind is free. Nobody owns the wind. There's no carbon dioxide pollution associated with this either. Some cons are that these turbines are expensive. You can't put them everywhere. So like, for example, this map, only the darker blue regions are where wind farms are possible. And so like in the Helena area, we don't really have wind farm potential. These things can be kind of noisy. They make some noise when they're turning. I have heard some things about how people think that the noise from these can like make you sick or give you cancer. It can't, it's just noisy. And then these sons of guns are pretty freaking ugly to look at. Like, if this is out your back window, you don't really want to be looking at that. These are good to put in the ocean, but for example, in Montana, these ones here are over on your way to Great Falls. So next renewable resource is hydroelectric energy. So this is when you build a dam and then water flowing through the dam spins turbines as it flows through to generate the electricity. Some pros of this are that it's free, meaning that like no single company entity owns the water that's flowing through the dam. There's no carbon dioxide pollution associated with this at all. Some cons of hydroelectric dams are that there can be pretty significant habitat or ecosystem damage. So dams, we talked about this way in the beginning of the year, but dams trap sediment here in front of the dam, and then they also can cause the water behind the dam to warm up, which can be bad for fish that live in the water. And there are limited sites. You can't build hydroelectric dams everywhere. An example in Montana, this is a picture of the Canyon Ferry Dam. Next, we have geothermal energy. This is pretty much when you've got groundwater that gets heated by some type of underground volcanism. You can use that groundwater, you can make it spin turbines using the steam, pretty much like all the other energy production processes. Some pros of this are that there's no carbon dioxide pollution associated with this at all. It's all just water. Some cons are that it can be exhausted if overused. So here they've got it going up and through and back down, but there's some water loss here due to the steam. So if you can't fill it back up as fast as you're taking it back out, it can be overused. There's pretty good potential in the western United States because we have like the Yellowstone volcano is here, so there's like some volcanic activity happening on the western side of the US, so there's good potential for this. Examples in Montana are pretty much anywhere where there's a hot spring. So like around here there's Broadwater, but then there's also like Warm Springs, Boulder Hot Springs, White Sulphur Springs. Anywhere where there is like a hot spring, there is potential for this geothermal energy. Okay, last thing is tidal or wave energy. So this is when you've got waves in an ocean or a really large lake, like the Great Lakes of Michigan, that you can stick these turbine things out in the water, and then the waves flowing through them cause these buoys to move up and down, and you can use that pressurized water to spin some turbines to generate electricity. Pros are that there's tons of energy in the oceans. The waves of the oceans contain an amount of energy that's kind of mind-boggling to humans, and there's no carbon dioxide pollution at all needed or caused by these turbines. There's no burning of anything, so there's nothing nasty coming off of them. Some cons are that this needs more research. These turbines can be expensive, and then there are limited sites. Not you can't just plunk one of these down in the ocean anywhere and expect that it's going to work. It has to be in a place where you get good wave movement and you can run lines to power plants that are onshore.